Welcome back. It's July, and what I have to say, after the lovely sun of June, I was expecting July to be just as good, but as we come towards the end of the month, it's been rather a wet and soggy kind of month so far. And if you're listening to this today, then probably some of you might have seen me yesterday at Kaleidopod, which was our first and probably our last ever Doctor Who event that we did at the Midland Arts Centre. Anyway, we're going to go into an interesting selection, I think it's fair to say, for July. And as always, we're showcasing audio clips from radio and TV soundtracks that have come from the Kaleidoscope archive. Things that you won't have heard before because they were all returned, they were all missing, they've all come back, so to speak. And if you recognise the odd one, well, that might be because they've been released on commercial CD since we found them. But in the main, most of them have been sitting in archives forever. And as you know, for those of you who know me very well, the wider TV access campaign of the early 1980s inspired me really to get Kaleidoscope started. And ever since then, part of our mission really has been to get things back on the airwaves, get things back on the TV screens so people can see them again. So, July, we're going to start with something really interesting here. This is from the 24 Hours programme. This is from the 5th of March 1967. It's a section on the Armenian Manuscripts, and then it goes into the news headlines and the weather.
Tonight has seen, it seems, the final episode in the mystery of the Armenian Manuscripts. Today, one of the principal characters in the story, Bishop Shahe Ajamian, slipped back into London. But this is, after all, a mystery story, so let's start from the beginning. In Episode 1 last Friday, The Guardian revealed that some very old, rare and valuable Armenian manuscripts were to be sold by auction at Sotheby's in London on March the 14th. Sotheby's issued a catalogue, as they do for any sale, but there was something strange about this particular catalogue. Nowhere did it say who it was who was selling the manuscripts. One man who was considerably upset by this was an expert on Armenian history, Professor Lang of London University, so he went to Sotheby's to find out more. He soon realised that these documents were quite unique and could only have come from one place, the library of the Armenian Patriarch in Jerusalem. This surprised him. He began to make inquiries. How could they have been removed from the library? How come they were to be sold by Sotheby's? To remove such manuscripts from the Jerusalem library requires the highest authority. No one person could have acted alone. At least 3 senior members of the Armenian Church in Jerusalem had to be present at any time when the vault containing the manuscripts is opened. But apparently the Armenian Patriarch in Jerusalem was not aware that the manuscripts had left their place of safekeeping. Furthermore, to actually sell the manuscripts, it is necessary to have the agreement of many archbishops from all over the world. Certainly, no such agreement had ever been given. Who then had removed them? Who was offering them for sale? The arrival in London from Jerusalem of Bishop Ajamian, presumably sent by the Armenian Patriarch to investigate the matter, merely increased the mystery. He stayed at the Hilton Hotel and had talks with Sotheby's and the Armenians' London Archbishop Tumayan. Sotheby's assured the press that they had documents proving their authority to go ahead with the auction, but they declined to produce these or to name the authority. On Saturday, Bishop Ajamian left London Airport, apparently bound for Jerusalem. However, there are persistent rumours that instead he went to Lisbon to seek support from a rich Armenian foundation in order to buy back the missing manuscripts. Meanwhile, leading Armenian churchmen and professors of Armenian history from all over the world were becoming very anxious. Concern was being expressed by people as far apart as Mr. Nubar Gulbenkian, the millionaire, and Izvestia, the Russian newspaper. Earlier tonight, the head of the Armenian Church, His Holiness the Supreme Catholicos of all Armenians, spoke to 24 Hours from Soviet Armenia.
These manuscripts belong to the Armenian Church and the Armenian people. No one has the right to sell, damage, or auction these stolen manuscripts. They must be returned to Jerusalem, where they belong. I appeal to the royal family and the British people to save these manuscripts and return them to Jerusalem.
In fact, since that conversation, we have good news for His Holiness, for Sotheby's tonight issued a statement saying that the disputed manuscripts are to be handed back to the Armenian Church. They have, they say, after consulting the vendor, agreed to stop the sale and deliver the manuscripts to Bishop Ajumian, who is taking them back to Jerusalem. So that's the end of the story. But there are two questions still left unanswered. Who is the mysterious but clearly highly placed vendor of the manuscripts? Why is Sotheby's still so anxious to keep his name a secret?
Well, there's the happy but perhaps incomplete ending to today's mystery. And here are the news headlines at 11:02. Crucial talks between Britain and Malta on the defence cuts crisis were still on at the Commonwealth Office tonight after more than 4 hours. The island's Prime Minister, Dr. Borge, indicated when he arrived that the talks are on the point of breaking up, but concessions by Britain could prevent the deadlock. The talks will continue tomorrow. Left-wing Labour MP Mr. Sidney Silverman faces possible expulsion from the Parliamentary Labour Party after lashing out today at the Prime Minister's attack last week on his backbench rebels. Our political correspondent says Labour MPs were wondering tonight whether Mr. Silverman's stand might lose him the Labour whip. After 15 left-wingers met to consider the Prime Minister's speech and decided to press next Thursday for a full meeting of the Parliamentary Party to discuss it. The number of children killed in the fire at the orphanage in the French Alps today is now put at 18. 28 other children are in hospital, 4 of them very seriously hurt. The Minister of Transport, Mrs. Barbara Castle, has promised an official inquiry into the derailment earlier today at Conington, in which 5 people were killed. She said it was an entirely different type of crash from the one near Birmingham last week.
And lastly, today's letter from St. Paul's College in Cheltenham, a student, L.J. Cresswell, wrote to Peking asking for information about table tennis in China. This is the reply he got on a paper headed The Table Tennis Association of the People's Republic of China, 3 Taiyangkung, Peking. Dear Sir, at the moment we haven't yet any books on table tennis in foreign language edition. Now we are sending you under separate cover a copy of quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. Chairman Mao Zedong is the greatest leader of the Chinese people and the revolutionary people of the whole world. Mao Zedong's thought is the Marxism, Leninism of the era in which imperialism is heading for total collapse and socialism is advancing towards worldwide victory. It is a powerful ideological weapon for opposing imperialism, revisionism and dogmatism. Mao Zedong...
Now, have you ever heard of Winston Churchill? Well, you probably have. He was quite a famous Prime Minister. I'm not going to say any more about him, though, because this is his obituary from the BBC Home Service when he died in 1965.
The great wartime task was drawing to an end. It fell into 3 episodes. From Hitler's accession to 1939, Winston Churchill had been the unheeded prophet of coming disaster. From the fall of France to the invasion of Russia, he was the pilot who weathered the storm. From June 1941 to the end, he was the architect of the Grand Alliance which destroyed Nazism.
The first 2 of these 3 fine roles, the prophet and the pilot, are easily understood because they can be admired in their wholeness. Their dimensions grow greater with distance. The third cannot yet be estimated. We of the present are still living in the consequences and controversies of these things. To the end, greatness never deserted him. It would have been easy and honourable for him to have retired in 1945 at the climax of his career, at the moment of victory. That he did not do so was due to his high sense of obligation to the new world he had striven to shape, a sense of duty to which he gave undying expression in the first year of the peace for which he had striven. Let us recall certain passages from his famous address to Westminster College, Fulton, in the United States.
A world organization has already been erected for the prime purpose of preventing war. UNO, the successor of the League of Nations, with the decisive addition of the United States and all that that means, it's already at work. We must make sure that its work is fruitful, that it is a reality and not a sham, that it is a force for action and not merely a frothing of words, that it is a true temple of peace in which the shields of many nations can someday be hung up, and not merely a cockpit in a tower of Babel. Before we cast away the solid assurances of national armaments for self-preservation, we must be certain that our temple is built not upon shifting sands or quagmires, but upon the rock. Anyone can see with his eyes open that our path will be difficult and also long. But if we persevere together, as we did in the 2 world wars, though not alas in the interval between them, I cannot doubt that we shall achieve our common purpose in the end. The Dark Ages may return. The Stone Age may return on the gleaming wings of science. And what might now shower immeasurable material blessings upon mankind may even bring about its total destruction. Beware, I say, time may be short. Do not let us take the course of allowing events to drift along until it is too late. If there is to be a fraternal association of the kind I have described, with all the extra strength and security which both our countries can derive from it, let us make sure that that great fact is known to the world, and that it plays its part in steadying and stabilizing the foundations of peace. There is the path of wisdom. Prevention is better than cure.
He was Prime Minister from 1951 to 1955. 4 months before his retirement, he was the centre of a moving scene in Westminster Hall. He was presented by both Houses of Parliament with a portrait and a commemorative book signed by most members of all parties. It was the tribute of Britain to her valiant old leader, and his reply was, in effect, his farewell to the nation.
I was very glad that Mr. Attlee described my speeches in the late war as expressing the will not only of Parliament but of the whole nation. I have never accepted what many people have kindly said, namely that I inspired the nation. Their will was resolute and remorseless, and as it proved, unconquerable. It fell to me to express it, and if I found the right word, you must remember that I've always earned my living by my pen and by my tongue. It was the nation and the race dwelling all around the globe that had the lion's heart. I had the luck to be called upon to give the roar. I also hope that I sometimes suggested to the lion the right places to use his claws. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now nearing the end of my journey. I hope I still have some services to render. However that may be, and whatever may befall, I am sure I shall never forget the emotion of this day, or be able fully to express my gratitude to those colleagues and companions with whom I have lived my life for this wonderful honor they have done me.
If you were in the southern region in the 60s, you will have been able to watch a programme called Celebrity Challenge. This is from 1967, and this is from Bognor.
Hello, good evening and welcome. Well, you've heard of Cup Final Day at Wembley. This is Cup Final Day at Bognor. Indeed, it's the Cup Final of Celebrity Challenge, and we're delighted tonight to welcome the two teams who've got through the previous rounds and have come through right through to the final here at Bognor. Without any further ado, incidentally, I must tell you a slight further ado, this is the very handsome Challenge Cup that the winning team is going to take away with them. Right, the Stevenses and the Trumans. Let's start with the Stevens family. Here they are, and first of all, the head of the family, Grosvenor Stevens.
Good evening.
And next to him his charming wife, Olive.
Hello.
And finally, one of their sons, George Stevens.
Hello.
And opposing them, we have the tennising Trumans, led by Humphrey Truman.
Good evening.
Next to him, Christine.
Good evening.
And finally, Nell Truman.
Good evening.
Straight into the game, then. I think everybody should know the rules by now. Grosvenor Stevens, would you like a question on Shakespeare? 3 points if you get it right, none if you don't get it right.
Oh, it's better than drink anyway. You started on drink last time.
Yeah, I did. I think you're quite right. Would you like one on Shakespeare?
Yes, please.
All right. What was the name of Hamlet's father in the play by Shakespeare?
Claudius.
No, his name was Hamlet. No marks there. That surprised you, didn't you? Humphrey, would you like one called Work It Out for Yourself in 10 seconds?
Yes, I'll try.
All right. There are 16 teams taking part in a quiz knockout contest. How many matches must be played to find the winning team? 10 seconds.
15.
That's right, yes. My hat, you are quick. 15 is right. Olive, this is called It's Been in the Papers Lately.
Well, I suppose I'd better.
You'd better. What nationality is the new Dean of St. Paul's?
Ooh,
You'd better, hadn't you?
I'd better, yes. Australian.
No, you're wrong too. He's a New Zealander.
Oh.
No marks there. Christine, this is called mouth-watering food.
No.
No. All right. Well, now, a 3-point or a 6-point. This means a selection of questions, the 6 being about twice as hard as the 3, but 3 to you or 6 to you if you get them right. If you get them wrong, the points go to the other side, but you can confer on the 6.
I'll take a 3.
A 3. Right. In 5 seconds, please. Does the book of Hezekiah appear before or after the Psalms in the Bible?
Before.
Well, there's no such book as Hezekiah, so you give the... That's 3 marks to the Stevens there. We can't... I bet you would have fallen for that, so wouldn't you? George. No, don't say a word. George, would you like one on football?
No, thank you.
No? Would you like a 3-point or a 6-point?
6, please.
6. All right, you can get into a huddle now, but I want the answer from one of you in 5 seconds after I've asked the question. All right? Very quickly. An electric train is travelling at 50 miles an hour and the wind is blowing at 50 miles an hour in the opposite direction. Which way does the smoke go?
Backwards.
Oh, upwards,
No, it's an electric
straight.
train. There's no smoke. 6 points. 6 points to the Trumans. That's the way to get the points, isn't it? Yes. Nell, would you like one on pop music?
Yes.
Which record was at the top of the charts for the whole of September and who made it?
The Beatles?
No! Good heavens above. The Last Waltz. Engelbert Humperdinck, alias Jerry Dorsey. So no marks. That was a first question. And that's the end of the round. There's the score. The Trumans have got 9 and the Stevens 3.
Now then, on the 9th of October 1963, BBC Radio looked back at the scrapbook for 1953, and these are some excerpts about what it found.
The year opened with gay expectancy, but then came disaster. On the last day of January, a great storm. Its first victim, the British Railways motor ship Princess Victoria, bound from Stranraer in Scotland to Larne in Ireland. A car ferry ship with great doors in her stern for the cars to drive aboard. These doors were smashed in by the waves.
When the ship hurled over, I slid into one of the lifeboats. The waves were bashing the lifeboat against the side of the ship, and she was taking water pretty heavily. So I jumped out of that and clung to a raft with about 5 people on it, but I could see that was pretty hopeless because there's too many on the raft and she might have sunk, so I struck out for another single raft by itself. When I looked round, I could see the boat had completely turned turtle. I just lay on top of the raft exhausted.
133 lives lost. That night came a record high wind of 125 miles an hour. 8 million trees were blown to the ground in Scotland. An enormous tidal surge swept down the North Sea. At Southend, the tide rose 11.5 feet above normal. Then came the worst invasion of eastern England by the sea for 200 years. The news was fantastic.
At Scarborough, holes had been torn in the sea wall and the lifeboat washed from its house. At Bridlington, the sea broke into a theatre. Huge waves smashed the new sea wall at Whitstable and flooded the town. At Canvey Island, thousands of people are being evacuated.
I woke up, heard a funny noise. Wonder what it was. I got out of bed, and when I looked outside, there was a flea. The water was coming up and up, and I jumped on the bed settee first. I thought, well, I could get on something higher than this. Well, this table was floating round the room, and I threw myself across it, because the water was washing over me then. So I got on my feet and stood up, and there I stood until I was so exhausted by standing, I tried to get down on the table to sit, but I lost my balance and my feet and legs went in the water. I sat like that until I was rescued on Tuesday.
On Tuesday? But you must have been there for 3 days.
Yes, I was there for 3 days. I fought against sleep and I fought against unconsciousness.
At Sheerness, the dockyard is completely flooded and naval craft in it have capsized. In all the East Coast areas, 25,000 houses are flooded. 32,000 people are homeless.
Well, it was about 9:15 when we first found water seeping under the door, and within 10 minutes it was risen to a height indoors of about 7 feet. We, of course, didn't realise then that the dunes had collapsed behind us, and we stayed in the house until the end fell out, and we could see the waves sweeping by.
Did you all get away safely?
The baby, which was tied to my back, he was 6 months old, was swept away with one big wave, and the 2 children succumbed from exposure, and my wife died after they'd rescued her.
The police say only people with very urgent business will be allowed in the flooded areas. Troops are helping with the rescue operations, while 19,000 servicemen and 7,000 civilians are working to plug the breaches in the sea defences with sandbags.
It was the worst national disaster since the war, and it called forth innumerable quiet deeds of heroism worthy of a wartime VC.
I went down on Sunday, started a bit of diving to see if there was anybody in the houses.
Diving?
Yeah.
What do you mean, in a diving suit?
No, swimming. See if there's anybody in the houses and getting what people there were out alive.
Did you manage to rescue many?
Yeah, we got quite a few out that were all right.
Who's we?
My brother and I.
Can you tell me about any of them that you rescued?
Very little. We never stopped to inquire the names or anything like that. We just got them out, took them back and went for more.
How many did you manage to rescue?
About 7, I should think.
Go on, keep tell me.
Anyway, we got another one out this morning, and we got 3 bodies out of one house, and 1 floating in the side of the dike. After that, we just searched the houses to see if there's any more in there.
And you did all this by diving and swimming under the 2 windows?
Yes, it's the only way we could get to a lot of them.
You must be expert swimmers.
Well, pretty reasonable.
The death roll over 300, but uncounted thousands were saved. The whole nation was aroused. This catastrophe called up again the old cheerful blitz-time spirit of courage and helpfulness.
1953, 8 years since the Hitler War. 8 tough, downbeat years, the austerity years. The time of disillusionment for any super-optimists who fondly expected a better post-war world. And the post-war reaction from austerity and disillusionment and shortages? Disenchantment, cuttedness, self-interest. I'm all right, Jack. Then up comes disaster, and, blow me, all the Jacks find their common humanity again.
A pity it takes a disaster. But now, as the floods go down, 1953 recovers from its bad start. This is the year when Mr. Macmillan, as Minister of Housing, promises 300,000 new houses in the year.
This is the year of sweet farewell to rationing. Eggs, meat, fat, bacon, sweets, all derationed. This is the upbeat year.
Radio has always been a great medium for storytelling, and it's not unsurprising to find that many of the classics have been done over the years. This is an extract from Beau Geste, Part 1, from Radio 4 on the 3rd of April 1972, in Storytime.
Have you heard of our little post of Zindanov, north of your Nigeria? No? Well, you hear it now. And it is where this incomprehensible tragedy took place. Behold me then one morning, one devilish hot morning, yawning in my pajamas in my quarters, and then, as I wearily light a wretched cigarette, there comes running my orderly, babbling I know not what of a dying Arab scout. They are always dying of fatigue, these fellows, if they have hurried a few miles. On a dying camel, who cries at the gate that he is from Zindanov, and that there is a siege, a massacre, battle, murder, and sudden death, all slain and expecting to be killed, making the devil of a row and so forth. And is it the dying camel who cries all this, I ask, even as I leap into my belts and boots, and rush to the door to shout, to arms, to my splendid fellows. But no, Monsieur le Major, declares the orderly, it is the dying scout, dying of fatigue, on the dying camel. Then bid him not to die on pain of death, till I have questioned him, I reply, as I load my revolver. And tell the sergeant major that an advance party of the Foreign Legion on camels marches in 9 minutes from when I shouted to arms, and the rest of them on mules. You know the sort of thing, my friend. You have turned out your god of houses of the West African frontier forts, nearly as quickly and as smartly at times, no doubt. Anyhow, I was soon away with the advance party on swift camels. A mule squadron was following, and a company of Senegalese would do 50 kilometers a day on foot until they reached Zindanov. Yes, and in what I flatter myself is the unbreakable record time between Tokotu and Zindanov, we arrived, and riding far on in advance of my men, I listened to the sound of firing or of bugle calls. I heard no sound whatsoever, and suddenly, topping a ridge, I came in sight of the fort, there below me on the desert plain, near the tiny oasis. There was no fighting, no sign of Arabs, no trace of battle or siege. No blackened ruins strewn with mutilated corpses here. The tricolor flew merrily from the flagstaff, and the fort looked absolutely normal. A square grey block of high, thick mud walls, flat castellated roof, flanking towers, and a lofty lookout platform. All was well. I waved my cap above my head and shouted aloud in my glee. They should know that relief was at hand, and that be the Arabs near or far, the danger was over, and the flag safe. I, Henri de Beaujolais, had brought relief. I fired my revolver 6 times in the air, and then I was aware of a small but remarkable fact. The high lookout platform at the top of its long ladder was empty. Strange, very strange. I must offer the officer in charge my congratulations upon the excellence of his lookout as soon as I had embraced and commended him. New as he might be to independent command, this should never have happened. One would have thought he could as soon have forgotten his boots as his sentry on the lookout platform. A pretty state of affairs, bon Dieu, in time of actual war. Here I was, approaching the fort in the broad light of day, firing my revolver, and not the slightest notice taken. I might have been the entire Arab nation. No, there must be something wrong, in spite of the peaceful look of things and the safety of the flag. And I pulled out my field glasses to see if they would reveal anything missed by the naked eye. Then, as I halted and waited for my camel to steady himself that I might bring my field glasses to bear, I wondered if it were possible that this was an ambush. Could the Arabs have captured the place, put the defenders to the sword, left the flag flying, and now be waiting for a relieving force to ride in trustful innocence and close formation up to the muzzles of their rifles? Possible? but quite unlike Brother Arab. You know what his way is when he has rushed a post or broken a square, a dirty fighter if ever there was one. And as I focused my glasses on the walls, I rejected the idea. Moreover, yes, there were the good European faces of the men at the embrasures, bronzed and bearded, but unmistakably not Arab. And yet again, that was strange.
Now, most people know that Dr. Finlay's Casebook was a TV series. What you might not know is that it was a radio series as well. And I have to say that for some of these, you can probably find them out on various radio collectors' circuits. But officially, there are lots and lots of them missing. This is an extract from A Matter of Confidence from Radio 4, there again on the 3rd of April 1972, from the same reel, no less.
What is that, Janet? Milk.
Aye, Dr. Finlay, good and hot, and a wee drop of whiskey. Now you just drink it up.
What for?
If that cold, of course. Then a hot bath with mustard in it and straight to bed. My mother always said there was no better way to break a cold.
That was a long time ago, Janet. Medical science has progressed a bit, she said.
Oh, aye, you found a cure for the cold then, Doctor?
Well, no, but we've got treatments to alleviate it. I mean, those old wives' cures are out of date. Anyway, I can't go to bed, Janet. I've got to get off on my rounds.
Oh, Dr. Finlay, you cannot go out like that. You'll catch your death of pneumonia. Dr. Cameron, will you tell him he's not to go out? You can see he has a temperature.
I can indeed. And that makes him a patient under doctor's orders. Stay indoors today, Dr. Finlay. I'll look after your calls.
Yes, Doctor. Anything else? Having consulted the doctor, I'd be disappointed if I didn't get a prescription.
For the common cold, I invariably prescribe a generous measure of whiskey and hot milk, followed by a mustard bath. Janet's mother swore by it, you know.
Yes, Janet told me. All right, you win. Bring on the mustard, Janet.
Did you enjoy your bath?
Oh, very beneficial, Janet. I feel like a lightly done sirloin. Who was that that just came in?
Donald Sinclair, Dr. Finlay. I told him you were not well, but he insisted. You really should not be seeing patients.
Well, as he's here. Janet, what did your mother swear by for boils?
A nice linseed poultice, of course, Doctor.
But in that case, let's forget it. I suspect that Donald would prefer her whiskey cure. Ah. Hello, Donald. How's the farming?
None the better for the old time I'm wasting running hither and yon over a wee bit of my boil. Is it ready for cutting yet, do you think, Dr. Finlay?
No, but let's have a look.
That's a nasty cold you have there, Doctor. Have you ever tried eating a whole raw onion?
No, I have not. Myself, I swear by whiskey and hot milk and a mustard bath.
Does it cure the cold?
No. There's a raw onion.
No. Well, it's cheaper than whiskey.
No. Donald, I'm afraid that you're going to have to come back again in a couple of days. You should have come to a head by then.
You feel easier, Mr. Murdoch?
I think I'll see the afternoon through.
Thank you for your help, Mr. McNabb.
Now, where do you think you're off to?
Back to the dispensary, of course. I have 2 folk coming in for prescriptions at 4.
Oh, no, you don't. You've a temperature of 101.
He's right, Dad. Go to bed.
What is cured, my lass? That concoction did the trick.
It's just alleviated the symptoms. For a cure, you need rest.
You sound like a doctor.
Oh, well, I'm not.
Dad, a doctor will tell you the same.
You can't manage on your own, lass. There's books to keep, stocks to check, the customers, I on the prescription.
Mr. Murdoch, I'm up to the dispensing. Now, supposing I were to stay here and help for a few days, you could have a rest.
But why should you, lad?
Well, you know, it's good experience for me.
But what about your round?
It's not my round, it's Kingsley's. He'll be back next Monday. They can do without me for a week.
I can't afford to pay.
You know, that's all right. Garsons are paying me. I'll telephone Mr. Garson, and he'll be glad for me to learn the trade from this end.
Do you really mean it?
Of course.
Amy, is the back bedroom fit to use?
It could be in half an hour.
Let's see it is. Mr. McNabb, I'm grateful to you.
We both are. Thank you very much.
Now, when David Jason was at the height of his fame, doing things like sharp intake of breath, before he'd really got going on Only Fools and Horses, he did something on radio called the Jason Explanation. And this is from the 9th of April 1980. This is David Jason explaining about progress.
Hello, my name's David Jason, and welcome to my explanation of progress. I think the explanation of progress is quite simple, really. You know, someone asking, what is lightning, led to the invention of electricity. Someone asking, what's a hangover, led to the invention of alcohol. And someone asking, what happens after death, led to the invention of the Liberal Party. Right. So, I just want you to sit back in your 20th century chairs, sipping your 20th century coffee, and let us give you some 20th century hypertension with the Jason explanation of progress.
The Jason Diaries.
January the 1st, 1999. Things are looking up for the new year. The Prime Minister, Lena Zavaroni, has promised to get inflation down to triple figures by the end of the year, and to solve the pensions problem with a brand new scheme. It's called euthanasia. The pound rose 2% against the Kensitas coupon, and water has just been discovered under the North Slick. I have made a resolution to cut down to 5 a week, the price of meals being what they are. Today won the pools, nearly £98,000. Another £2,000 and I could have paid the milkman. January the 3rd. Quite a good day, really. Only got attacked 43 times by muggers. Most inconvenient. Have decided to pay them by standing order in future. Went down to London for a demonstration against Britain being delegated Europe's third airport. Stuck at Paddington after last piggyback is cancelled due to a slip disc at Didcot. Still, the Home Secretary, Mr. Ian Smith, has announced a new plan. He plans to introduce a new fuel-saving transport scheme. It's called FEET. Frank Sinatra gave his farewell concert at Wembley tonight, his first of the year.
Adam, what do you think?
Shh, quiet, Eve. I'm working on something.
Adam, turn round and look.
Oh, what?
Adam! Oh. What are you doing?
It's incredible. I've made a fantastic discovery. Do you know it's possible to produce a test tube baby? Look, this is the theory of it. With the right fertility specimens and under certain conditions, a baby can actually form in this...
Adam, just turn round.
Eve, will you go away?
Well, I'm wearing my new fiddly suit. Do you like it?
Yeah. Yes, I do, yeah.
Oh, you think of me. Now, what were you saying about test tube babies?
Never mind, come over here, I've got a better idea.
Progress, they call it progress. Well, I reckon we're no better off now than we were running about in loincloths, hunting mammoths.
Wow, we're worse off. Where can you find a decent mammoth nowadays?
Exactly. Barbaric. We haven't progressed at all, not with half the world warring with the other half, killing each other. Those sort of people are worse than barbarians.
Oh, that's right, they should be hanged.
Hanging's too good for them. They should be shot.
Aye, then hanged.
And then put in prison where they belong.
Exactly. You don't want dead people walking the streets mingling with innocent passers-by, do you?
Mind you, attitudes have changed. I mean sex.
Aye.
Take sex.
Oh, aye.
When we were lads, there was none of this promiscuity and fornication.
No, none of that. No, we just fornicated all the time.
Aye, but no promiscuity.
Oh, no, far too busy fornicating for that.
But we knew nothing about sex in those days.
No, I know. No, I didn't know the facts of life till I was 53.
Aye. Hang on. How have you got 40 kids?
Well, it wasn't until I was 53 that I knew what I was doing.
Ah, exactly. And what about transport? I bet the man who invented the first wheel never thought that by inventing the first wheel he was inventing traffic jams and pollution.
No, it's not the man who invented the first wheel I blame. It's the man who invented the other three that causes trouble.
Aye, and in our day, a journey to Middlesbrough would seem nigh on impossible. Nowadays, they've sent men to Mars. And they'd even think life was there.
Oh, no. Oh, come on. There's no life in Middlesbrough. No, we haven't progressed that much. Hey, did you see the match last night on the telly?
No, I had ITV on last night.
Oh, I see. So you didn't see Doctor Who then, did you?
No, I had ITV on all night.
Oh, you saw the late night horror film. Here, wasn't it fantastic with that bloke, all the other blokes' thingies?
No, I didn't see it, actually. I think we must have turned over to BBC Two.
You didn't see anything that I saw then?
No.
I don't know, Miles. It's true what they say, you know. Television has killed the art of conversation, you know.
Victor Borge was a massive start, I think it's fair to say, in the 50s and 60s particularly. And this is from the 16th of June 1958. This is Victor Borge presenting Comedy and Music.
The names are very easy to remember. We always choose names for our children that are easy to remember so that you can call them fast, you know. You don't have to stand around and think for 10 minutes with names. Now, the oldest, for instance, her name is... strangest thing. When the others, the boys' names are very short. David. No, that's my neighbor's kid. Well, they don't come when I call them anyway. May I please take your order? I mean, what would you like to hear? Which composers would you like to hear? If you
Mozart!
Mozart? Who asked you, by the way? Mozart?
Bach!
Bach. Which Bach, sir? We have quite a few. Johann, Sebastian, Offen.
Tchaikovsky!
Zwei Bach. Carry Me. No, that's an old folk song. Just a moment. I think the lady came first away.
Tchaikovsky!
Tchaikovsky.
Beethoven!
I haven't spelled Mozart yet, just a minute. Russian. Beethoven.
Rachmaninoff!
Sure.
Liberace!
May I see your ticket? Which one do you want, by the way? The one... George, or the one who has no identification? I mean, there's no first name, you can't...
Wagner!
Wagner?
Cole Porter!
I'm sorry, we don't serve beer in here. Well, I guess we have enough. This will carry us over the weekend. Very much.
John Philip Sousa!
It is indeed an honor to meet you. I think I should stop this, because if everybody have to introduce themselves in the audience, we'll never get through. I should like to begin with Tchaikovsky. Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, his full maiden name. Now, before I play these, your favorites, I would like to read to you a couple of lines from the story, the life story of these great masters, because some of these stories are most uninteresting. This book contains the life story of the great masters, and as you now find, Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky, C under T. A. W. T. Tchaikovsky. Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Seafood. No, seafood note. It says, for further information, see above. Pete was born in Watkinsk, May 7th, 1840. Bad year. When he was a little boy, he never played out in the streets of Watkinsk like the other little children of Watkinsk. Because when Tchaikovsky was 1 month old, his parents moved to St. Petersburg. I told you it wasn't interesting, but you wouldn't listen. Now, the way Tchaikovsky might have composed Happy Birthday. Are you still there behind the fly screen? A wonderful orchestra. I'm just sorry we have to hide them behind the screen because they look so pretty behind the screen. You can only see them. It's very warm in there behind the screen. They should try it out here. I think we lost Scotland there, maybe. Was that too loud, Larry? Next, Chopin, the Chinese composer.
Now, it probably isn't very PC at the moment to talk about Russia in positive ways, but sometimes the odd extract comes along that I think is really fascinating. I don't know which year this is from the 1960s, but this is a report on May Day from Moscow.
Поздравляю вас с международным праздником трудящихся Днем 1 мая.
So it goes on to group after group, now to the Soviet Navy men who stand at the end of Red Square. And it's an impressive method of saluting your troops on May Day, I must say. Just let's remember as we watch these cars making their tour of this huge expanse in the heart of Moscow, of Red Square, that this is where the final battles of the Soviet Revolution of 1917 took place. It was here that the workers finally secured power, and the men who were killed in the last battles at the Kremlin are buried by the Kremlin wall. But for the centuries, this has been the great commercial center and the market of Moscow, where the highways of ancient Russia met and crossed. It's also the place where the Tsars used to carry out some of their public executions. And it's only in comparatively recent years that Moscow's come back into real fame as the capital of the Soviet Union. And now you see it parading in all its obvious strength today.
Здравствуйте, товарищи! Поздравляю вас с международным праздником трудящихся днем 1 мая.
And now the cars, the Marshal, the General, come down from Red Square, down the wide, broad, empty street by the side of the huge History Museum. If you're a museum goer, it may amuse you to know that there are 3 million exhibits inside that building. Down past the History Museum and out into what's called a Manège Square, named after the manège or the riding school of the old Tsar's stables, which are outside the Kremlin wall. And here, the cars pass by the front of the Moskva Hotel, which is one of the big new hotels, comparatively new hotels, and they go to the troops who wait outside to march by. There are 4 main streets that meet at this big intersection.
Поздравляю вас с международным праздником трудящихся днем 1 мая.
Cars now have swung round in, I call it Manège Square. It is in fact a juxtaposition of streets and squares, but the cars have swung round to the front of Gorky Street. The street that opens out to the left behind the troops in their steel helmets you're looking at is one of the famous thoroughfares of the city. It runs for miles. My hotel, I may say, is miles away along it on the left-hand side. And so they turn back again across this vast open space. There's the other end of the History Museum, and there again Red Square with the Kremlin towers in the background, to the opposite street which leads down into Manège Square proper. The stables I was talking about are way down on the right-hand side, in the far background on the right. And once again you see the Kremlin towers and walls. This area spreads through the heart of this city, runs from the hill on which we are now, right down to the river, to the Moscow River, which bounds the Kremlin on the other side.
Now, not a lot of people know that my compatriot in arms from Kaleidoscope and very best friend, Simon Carrad, used to write for Weekending, which was a topical Radio 4 news series. Here are some sketches from the 25th of May 1978 about Weekending.
There now follows an appeal by His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
Good evening. Tonight, I want to appeal to you on behalf of a very special minority, a small group of unfortunate children who can never lead a normal life like you. A small group of unfortunate children who, through no fault of their own, happen to be princes. Believe me, being royal is an awful thing to have to cope with. Most people can't imagine the difficulties and agonies royal children have to go through. The constant and exhausting pain of handshaking, the agonizing, excruciating jokes from mayors and local dignitaries during royal visits, especially ones like, "How's mum?" and "Where are the corgis?" or "If I kissed you, would you turn into a frog?" And then worst of all, perhaps, the constant upheaval from palace to palace, from realm to realm, deprives the royal child of the joys of a stable home. So what can you do to help? Well, quite simply, royal children, particularly older royal children, need money, lots of money. Often they have no means of outside support except for the Duchy of Cornwall. Even the basic essentials like polo sticks and goon annuals can prove expensive. Now, last year you were very generous. You, the public, gave me £145,000, more than double what was raised the year before. This year I'm asking you to make an even bigger effort and put a little more sunshine into a royal child's life, preferably in the Bahamas or the Seychelles. Please send your donations to me, Prince Charles, care of the BBC, and please remember, charity begins at the top.
And now here is next week's news. The weekend. Mr. Callahan makes another speech on the importance of the family unit. He says he always puts his family first, usually into embassies in Washington. The bishop who accused the Roman Catholic Church of being disloyal to Christ by abandoning the Latin Mass says that he believes that Jesus learned to speak Latin when he visited Turin to buy a shroud.
Monday. Following London Weekend Television's announcement that their series Enemy at the Door about the German occupation of the Channel Islands is to be shown in Germany, a spokesman says that over there it will of course be called Enemy Answering the Door. The sacked trainee chef who received a £1,000 cheque from Claridge's for unfair dismissal complains that it was covered in grease and both ends had been cut off.
Tuesday. After hearing that Mrs. Whitehouse had demanded that a TV commercial for a deodorant stick be banned because it was too suggestive, the manufacturers say that they are used to complaints ever since the packaging included the directions to remove top and push up bottom.
Wednesday. The nymphomaniac who is planning a trip to Lourdes says she is looking for a sex maniac to go with her, so that if she's not cured, she can at least have a damn good time on the way back.
Thursday. The stabbed policeman, whose life was saved by a notebook in his pocket, says if it had been his wage packet, he wouldn't have stood a chance.
Friday. Following the announcement by the Ministry of Education in Dublin that students would no longer be allowed to take pocket calculators into their examinations, a spokesman comments that any self-respecting Irish student knows how many pockets he has before he goes into the examination. And that is the end of next week's news.
And coming towards the end of the July show, really, this is from the 2nd of December 1977. This is an English She Is broadcast programme.
Savoy Hill, London, June 30th, 1926. Dear Mr. Shaw, it is becoming more and more apparent that a great responsibility rests with the broadcasting service in the matter of pronunciation. And in view of this, we are forming a small committee to advise us on specific points. The Poet Laureate and Sir Johnston Forbes Robertson most cordially support me in inviting you to join.
I accept and suggest offhand the following additions to the list of recent problems: cowardice, facile, fertile, isolate, Jacobean, exemplary. G. Bernard Shaw.
Robert Bridges, the committee's chairman, was a full-blooded man of letters, of a type now almost extinct. 82 years old, he was heaped with honours, set apart from the everyday world. He lived in Oxford, moved in literary circles, and was in general an eminent person.
Dear Mr. Lloyd James, I think miniature is very difficult. It seems authoritative for miniature. I have no opinion except to forbid miniature.
This was a fairly typical pronouncement when the advisory committee got going. Of the other original members, Shaw often seemed to have his tongue in his cheek, and Forbes Robertson was rarely seen or heard of. Along with them, the BBC recruited a professor of phonetics, Dr. Daniel Jones, and the essayist Logan Pearsall Smith, representing the Society for Pure English. The inaugural meeting was on July the 5th, 1926. 4 BBC officials, led by Reith, were present. The first fruit of their labour appeared later that month, a list of about 30 words.
From the Managing Director to all station directors, main and relay. You will see in the new Radio Times about the functioning of a pronunciation committee. I am enclosing the minutes of the first meeting, and I shall be glad if you will make every endeavour to have the decisions of this committee carried out by all at the station who announce or speak in any way at the microphone.
Whatever they may have said in the past, announcers were now to say privacy and despicable. The press thought it was great fun.
Daily News, July the 16th. Get the GBS accent. BBC guide on way to pronounce. Please do not say Sharabong.
Sharabong, or Sharabang, was a sign of troubles to come. Since it had been borrowed from the French nearly 100 years earlier, the committee decided that an English pronunciation was in order, thus Sharabang, and not Sharabong. It wasn't long before the committee, which became a much bigger and grander affair, decreed that after all it should be pronounced as in French, back to Sharabong, only to change its mind yet again and revert to Sharabang. Meanwhile, the nation went about its business and called it either a coach or a shara. It was difficult for the committee to find absolute authority for their decisions. To begin with, they met about 3 times a year to consider words that were bothering announcers or simply words that occurred to the committee. About some of them, they decided to say nothing. An educated person could say off. He could also say off. Vowels might be short, as in dance, or long, as in dance. On other matters, the committee said a great deal, at least among themselves. The minutes of the first meeting record some nice phonetic distinctions by Robert Bridges.
The chairman demonstrated that it is possible to give all vowels in unaccented syllables a flavour of their original character without unduly stressing the syllable containing them, and that indeed the matter was merely one of good or bad articulation. E.g., the slovenly speaker uses a single sound for all vowels in unaccented syllables. He says parody, parasite, Julia, Ophelia, where the speaker with good articulation says parody, parasite, Julia, and Ophelia. It was agreed that the announcer should attempt the pronunciation of such vowel sounds, but without becoming stilted.
This counsel of perfection was all very well for a poet laureate, but was perhaps a little impractical for daily use of the microphone, even in 1926. In any case, the work of the committee really boiled down to deciding how to pronounce a particular word about which there were conflicting views. If they couldn't agree, they voted on it. The trouble was that, as the committee realised from time to time, and as Lloyd James realised all the time, each alternative might have equal merit. But the committee had been set up to deliver judgments, not to tell people that, for example, it was equally correct to say capitalist or capitalist. As Lloyd James said in a radio talk, both are right, but it will simplify matters if we choose one, so we have chosen capitalist.
And the last one served up before July is quite a lengthy extract. This is quite a long extract. This is Trevor Bannister talking to me at a Kaleidoscope event some years ago about Are You Being Served and explaining why he left the series.
Now, it has to be said that I don't know if you've ever had a guest at one of our events who's been on TV so recently. Last Sunday night, last of summer
Yes,
wine.
indeed. Yes, indeed. The what we discovered was, in fact, the final episode.
Yes, absolutely.
Due to a little lady who's taken over as head of comedy, having been head of news. It's a great qualification, isn't it, really?
Let's bring the contrast out, because you were saying outside, that when you started, and our earliest credit for you was 1960.
Yes.
you were doing TV in a very different way, and there you are in 2009, 2010, shooting in high definition. Tell us about that kind of experience. How different is it now, making TV now, compared to when you started?
Well, it's not as much fun now. It was a lot of fun in those days because now television's run by accountants and not by people with artistic interests, qualifications, it seems. Everything is financial. So the finance involves the amount of time that you have. In the old days, we would have rehearsed the program that we were doing. I first did Coronation Street back in, I think it was 62 or 63. And in those days, you went in and you rehearsed 2 episodes, and you went into a rehearsal room, not unlike this room, which was all marked out, etc. And the cast arrived at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the director and all the rest of it. And so you rehearsed the episode. And you did that, and then you rehearsed the next episode. You did that every day until you went into the studio on a Friday, when the whole day was devoted in the studio to recording your episode. Retakes were only permitted under very extreme circumstances because, of course, time meant money even in those days. But having said that, you didn't need many retakes because you'd had a good rehearsal period. You all knew each other well, and you got to know each other well during the course of rehearsals. And so it was a very happy experience. Nowadays, only about 3 or 4 years ago, I went back to do some Coronation Street for Johnny Briggs's departure and playing his solicitor. And that now is a huge factory which makes film from 7 o'clock in the morning. How they do it, I don't know, because they do about 5 episodes a week. And they really do work under enormous pressure. There is no rehearsal. You've learnt your lines, you turn up, and the director says, well, you sit there, and you get up when he says that, and he can't, blah, blah. And that's it. The only rehearsal you get is when you choose to rehearse with your fellow actors and say, shall we just go over in the corner and rehearse this bit? Because there is no real rehearsal time. So you don't get familiar with each other, you don't get to know each other that well. It is making films.
It seems to me that TV has become obsessed with looking more like films, as you say. You know, the fact that everything is filmised nowadays to make it look like film.
Yes.
But also it's become obsessed with, if you like, the technology of itself. I mean, there's this obsession with making things in high definition. You know, it doesn't actually matter whether it's good quality necessarily in the writing or the direction or the acting, but it has to be in high definition so you can see every pimple on the face of the actors or whatever.
Well, that's right. And
So making something like Last Summer Wine there, I mean, did you get rehearsal time for that? Because it's quite an old-fashioned show.
For which
for Last of the Summer Wine.
Last of the Summer Wine. Well, Last of the Summer Wine. We'd all been doing it for a number of years, and I mean, some, like Dear Peter Sallis, had been doing it for 37 years because that's how long it had been going. There, you have a little more rehearsal time. The whole thing is made on location in that lovely part of the world of Holmfirth, and yes, you have. It was very much more like making what I would call old-fashioned television. Time was still important because, of course, everything is governed by finance now, and you can't overshoot and spend too much time and so on. But by virtue of the fact that we don't shoot on film anymore, we're shooting on whatever tape it is, I don't know. I'm not technically minded, but that does make it, easier.
Yes.
That is a much more pleasurable experience, because we all know each other, we all stay in the same hotel, and we've all known each other and worked together on and off for probably 40 years at some point. And so it is a much more relaxed atmosphere to work in, and a very pleasurable one.
I can still see them. I mean, I know they've said they've cancelled it, but I have this sneaking suspicion they'll bring it back for the odd Christmas special, because I think it hits a target audience, that kind of older generation that isn't hit by so much else on TV nowadays.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think there's the slightest chance of them doing that, because the powers that be and organisations and the way they're run, when new brooms come in, they like to make their sweeping very evident, for good or bad. I think ultimately it'll be proven to be bad because the function, in my view, well, in everybody's view, of the BBC is to provide national entertainment, to cover the whole spectrum. I never understand this. It's a mystery to me why the BBC feels that it has to compete against ITV in this ratings war. And you think, what ratings? The BBC have nothing to gain by ratings, other than just make lots more people happy, because they're not a commercial enterprise. They don't benefit from selling more packets of cornflakes during that programme or anything else. So it really doesn't come in. To me, the function of the BBC is simply to appeal right across the board and try and encompass the satisfaction of everybody, from young children's programmes right the way through. And that's what I feel about the one thing that a programme like Summer Wine did, was that it appealed to a particular spectrum.
Absolutely.
But the interesting thing is that over the last few years, I've started to get a lot of mail from people in their teens who've discovered this program. Now, they watched it for whatever reason, because they liked that person in something else and that one from something else. And they suddenly thought, this is a funny, quirky old sort of inconsequential, harmless piece of, and it's so new generations discover programs. So it really is timeless.
When people think of Trevor Bannister, I guess nowadays they will think of you in things like Last of Summer Wine, but because that's probably in recent years you've become known as a comedy actor. But we go back to The Secret Kingdom in 1960, which I think was the first thing that we found that you did on television. I mean, you were very much a dramatic actor when you went back to 1960. How did you get into the business?
Into the business of acting?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, into the business of acting, I appeared on television in 1960, but before that I'd done about 8 years of weekly repertory theatre all over the country in various places. And I went into acting from school. I was thrown out when I was 14, and I was never very interested in much in school apart from sport. I was very keen on sport. But I wasn't academically inclined, as they say, so I was a bit of a misfit in that sense. And my father, who was a self-made man, had a small business I come from a village in Wiltshire, and he had, small shops and things, and nothing elaborate, nothing exciting. But I didn't want to go into that. I wanted to go to drama school. The reason I subsequently discovered, I suppose that came from my grandfather on my father's side, had previously, for a short period in his life, been in music hall. And then way back in the 18th century, I discovered what I think are two relatives called John and Jack Bannister, who were quite renowned actors at Drury Lane in London. And there's a portrait of one of them in the National Portrait Gallery. So I think that's where the bad blood came in, and that's where that all crept in. So that's how I ended up going to drama school when I was 15, and then going into repertory. And the progression for every actor in those days was repertory into the West End, if you were lucky. And then, of course, that was the beginning, really, of television.
And your first role, I think, on TV was as a journalist, I think. Just a humble, I suppose almost a walk-on, in The Secret Kingdom. So I'm sure you probably won't remember much about that.
Do you know, I don't remember much about that.
It was a long time ago, 40 years ago.
Well, yes, indeed. But it was around that time that I also, I went into Coronation Street for the first time. In fact, I was offered the role in Coronation Street of that Philip Lowry played, which was sorry? Dennis Tanner. Yeah. I was offered that's right, and I was offered that role, and my agent wouldn't let me do it. He said, "Oh no, you don't want to do things like that. That's scheduled for 6 weeks." Which it was. Coronation Street was only scheduled to be a 6-week series. And he said, "Oh no, you don't want to do things like that. That it could be very detrimental to your future career." So I never did it. It was strange that about 3 years later, I did go into Coronation Street as an aluminium ladder salesman, and I was in for a few weeks, and then a few years later I went back as another character, and then went back as another character.
Well, that's one of the beauties of shows like, I suppose, The Crossroads, The Coronation Streets, The Bills, that you often, you went and did a bit part, and then you kind of went back a couple of years later, did another one, and kept working through it.
Yes, indeed.
Interesting you talking about Coronation Street, because the one thing you notice probably from what we're showing in the bar today, a lot of those plays were for Granada. I mean, you say you came from Wiltshire, but you actually did a lot of work for Granada in the kind of early 60s to mid-60s.
Well, it did. That came about, excuse me, because after all those years in repertory, I came to London, and started doing a bit of television, and then I did a play. I did a show called The World of Susie Wong, and then that was followed by, at the end of 1960, doing Billy Liar with Albert Finney, in which I played Arthur, he played Billy, and then I took over Billy from him. And that sort of set me off, and it also set me off on the sort of the northern run, really, because, I'm a West Country boy, I'm a, Wiltshire lad, and down that part of the world. But I found myself on the northern trail, which was great, which was lovely, and fortunately, accents came very easily, readily to me. So I did a lot of work playing northern characters, and that's when, Coronation Street and so on. That all came from Billy Liar, really.
And what strikes you about watching some of it, and Simon made a reference to the hand being sliced off and the bacon slicer there, it was very gritty, wasn't it? It was very realistic, like that Granada stuff. They were very
Granada was
down to earth.
Oh, Granada was the most wonderful. It was the best of all the television companies, I think. Subsequently, Thames became very productive, did a lot of very good things, as indeed did all the others. But Granada was, with Sidney Bernstein and that company, it was the beginning, and it was the birth of all those wonderful Alan Platers and all the northern writers and so on.
And of course, you ran it with your own series. I mean, you were the lead in The War of Darky Pilbeam. Was that the kind of first time when you had a lead in a TV series?
I suppose it was, really, now I think about it, yeah. I suppose it was. But you're right, Granada, they were very inclined to do northern drama, everything with a northern flavour, understandably, because they were a northern company. But they did some amazing work, and they also were very diverse. I did lots and lots of plays and D.H. Lawrence plays and all sorts of things for them. And they were very diverse, very adventurous.
It's interesting. I mean, certainly in terms of your plays career, as you said, I mean, it was quite dominated really by your work for Granada. You did a lot of work for them. But of course you were working in series, doing a lot of other series like Softly, Softly. And we're going to show you something here now from one of your series work you did for the BBC.
Oh, yeah.
You may never have seen this because this was made, but I don't think this was actually shown. So have a look at this on the Troubleshooters.
Oh, Troubleshooters, yeah.
And see if you remember making this in colour.
Yeah.
Believe it, Michael, do you?
You can believe anything if you've been in Singapore as long as I have.
Well, transfers are not my department, okay?
All right, it doesn't sound like Andy. But governments don't make formal protests over nothing.
Well, the Malays are reporting what they think is true. He's not the sort of man to go around calling sultans names.
Nonetheless, Stead has suspended him, so it's been taken seriously.
Yeah, very seriously. Well, he knows he's too valuable. We can't afford to lose him. Well, the sooner I sort it out, the better, I suppose.
Do you want to go up to Kuala Lumpur this evening?
No, thanks. I've only just got in from London. I want some sleep.
When do you want to go?
First thing in the morning.
Okay, I'll lay on the company chopper for you.
Now, I mean, that I think is so archetypal. You are what I call the clean-cut hero type. They want strong, decisive. You could have been the saint with that kind of no-nonsense approach, couldn't you? Do you remember making that?
I sort of, yes, I do vaguely now. I'm trying to link that with. Was this Troubleshooters or Mogul?
That was Troubleshooters. You did do Mogul, I think, originally, didn't you?
Yeah, I did Mogul originally because I played a shaved-headed American Buddhist monk. Absolutely. Had my head shaved to play this extraordinary Buddhist monk.
And your hair is one of your kind of best features, really. I mean, you were known for that kind of clean cut, kind of, handsome types, weren't you?
Well, those were the days.
The strange thing about that is that was made something called Electronic Cam, which was a new system, I think.
Oh, was
BBC
it?
were trying out to do it in colour, but that's quite unusual to have you in colour as early as 1968 for the BBC.
As when?
1968.
68, but everything went over to colour. I mean,
BBC wasn't showing it in colour in 68. I mean, it was. I think
because
it was 69
that's when
it
was 69, 68.
Yeah,
That's when we did the Dustbin Men, which which started off in black and white and then went into colour. I think.
Yes, it did.
I think.
That's right.
Because that was the changeover. That was when everything went from. And Granada had this enormous great studio. Because I remember doing a play called something Journey to Newgate. Do you remember they did a series about Newgate Jail?
The Rogues Gallery.
Rogues Gallery.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. You know it all. You're very good. The Rogues Gallery. Yes.
I didn't know Dennis Tanner.
I did one of those. Yeah. And that was lovely stuff. That was wonderful, exciting, big drama in the studio. Absolutely. With cows and pigs and horses running around, everything. It was fantastic, absolutely wonderful.
It's interesting you mentioned that because that was a kind of almost a period drama as well, wasn't it?
Well, it was period drama, yes, absolutely.
And you did a few of those in your career. In fact, we may even have.
Yes.
We're going to have a look at another one you did in the mid-70s here, from The Way of the World as well.
Oh, Way of the World, absolutely, yes, indeed.
Great.
Bill Maynard.
Absolutely.
Madam, what's to be found in the street today that holds the eyes of this house like a cat's at a mouse hole?
Colonel Courtly?
There's your wench at the front door, so fixed at whatever it is, she near swooned when I tapped her rump to make way. And here you, Mrs. Motherley, searching the scurfy movings out there in self-same way, and looking prodigious troubled at being caught at it. My curiosity stirs. Who comes, my old acquaintance?
Colonel Courtly, you make others' business your own, and your manner of it is double the offence. You're not a gentleman, sir.
My dear old friend, what stiff mood is this? Some occasion, I think. Who's coming? To be graciously received and graciously fleeced by Mrs. Motherley, the lodging housekeeper. Any ladies among them?
That's one of the perks in the business.
Your wife's not in the room, is she? I think.
Yes.
Is she? Oh, dear. I do apologise. But now, what I love is that you have done so much work and so many plays, as you say, and that was another great example of that. 1975, I think you did The Way of the World there.
Yes.
And yet your career did kind of shift really when the Dustbin Men came along, because suddenly, you started doing comedy as well, didn't you, as opposed to just drama?
Yeah, that was. I mean, but it wasn't comedy in the Are You Being Served sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it was written by that wonderful writer Jack Rosenthal. Again, it was northern television.
Yes.
And it was gritty. It was very ambitious.
Absolutely.
And it was all made on location. Which in those, it's the first time anything had been made on location without a studio audience. But Granada lost their nerve, unfortunately. Excuse me. And various people in importance in Granada said, but you can't show this. It's got no laughter track. That we can't hear people. And they said, no, it's meant to be a funny play, just like little funny plays.
Yeah.
And so they lost their nerve, and we had to show the programme exactly the same, in fact, as we do all these years later with Last of the Summer Wine. We had to show the programme on a massive screen in a studio and a couple of episodes, and bring an audience, an invited audience in to laugh, to put a laughter track on. And you say, well, that isn't actually what Jack Rosenthal was writing, really.
Yeah.
But it still worked. We
might be able to see a small bit of the Dustbin Men.
Possibly. And it still worked. And the Dustbin Men did something which television has never done before or since. It stuck itself in the Guinness Book of Records because it got 21.5 million viewers from its first episode to its 21st episode. And nothing has ever had such consistency.
Okay. Here's a little bit of yourself. If you can talk us through a little bit about this in a minute.
Oh, for God's sake, Ref, blow your whistle, let Her Majesty chuck on the cup, let's all get some dinner.
Oh, it's not that cup final.
Isn't it?
It's not even a football match.
Well, what's he cheering then? The whitewash on the bloody goalposts?
He's watching his team training.
He's not.
Never contradict the leader of the gang, my lad. Or I'm liable to massage your jugular vein with a dustbin.
Well, where's the enjoyment in him watching 11 fellas tripping round a field in their underpants, practising fouling each other?
Well, my mum enjoyed it. Watching fellas in their underpants. Every night till 1 o'clock in a Wednesday at nighty.
Didn't you get pneumonia?
You having said that now, about the fact it wasn't in front of a studio audience, actually when you watch it becomes very apparent then. I'd never thought about that before.
Yes.
It had that kind of location feel to it. And also the fact it was almost like a drama almost. Very up close there, wasn't it?
That's exactly right. And I mean, it was doing a situation comedy in which they were real characters. They were very, they weren't two-dimensional people. They had depth. They had lives outside, when we saw them, and there was, there was a degree of pathos in some of the episodes and so on. And no, it was meant to be. They were little sort of half-hour comedy dramettes, or whatever you want to call them.
Did it massively affect your life because suddenly you were being recognised more in the street? And
oh, well, yes, indeed. That was very nice, and we found it quite extraordinary because that was our first experience of sort of pop star following in a way, and we really couldn't go anywhere without and be left alone, which is very nice and very flattering, but it really reached silly proportions. Having said that, it gradually quietened down a bit, and looking back on it with reflection, it was very enjoyable.
Well, absolutely, it's a very difficult thing. I mean, some people love fame, and when you look at some people on, say, the X Factor now, who are desperate to become famous,
oh, yes.
And when you get to being famous, sometimes you realise that maybe it's a double-edged sword.
That's right.
If you can't go for a walk in the park without people trying to mob you for an autograph, maybe life is not worth living at times. So I always wonder how people like yourself, who were so well known, particularly in the 70s and 80s, kind of coped with that whole fame thing, really. Did you reach a point where you were quite glad when it kind of went on the wane a bit, and you could go out without people recognising you all the time?
Well, you do. Sometimes it can be very difficult. It's all right if you're on your own, but if you're with your wife or family or whatever, it can be a bit of a nuisance. But that's all part and parcel. Listen, if we didn't have all that, if we couldn't accept that, then we shouldn't be doing the job that we do, really, should we?
Absolutely. Now, the next bit we're going to show you here is probably one of your most famous roles, actually. Mark, if you want to run this, and we'll... Okay, there was an interesting still of it anyway. And we'll let Mark come back to that in just a mo.
Yes,
I mean, did you get this pilot, as it was originally, on the back of the Dustbin Men? Is that where you were asked to do it, or...?
There was a little bit of that, and I was also in the West End in a play at the time, a comedy called Move Over Mrs. Markham, a Ray Cooney play, and that's when I was offered. I met David Croft, one of the duo of the writers, David and Jeremy Lloyd. I bumped into him in a drinking club after the show one evening, and he talked about it and said, "Look, I've got this idea for the thing, would you..." Yes, and that's how it all came about. Yes, it was lovely.
But the most amazing thing about it when you were making it, though, was, of course, that it nearly didn't go out, of course. The original pilot had no time slot, was almost forgotten about, and it was only because of a tragedy, of course.
Well, it was.
It got shown in the first place.
You're absolutely right. And I must congratulate you on your homework. I understand. Are you a head teacher or?
I am. That's right. Actually,
you are a head teacher.
This is not homework.
Well, you obviously have done your homework, because very few people are aware of.
No, it's a misspent youth. Actually, it is watching too much television. That's what it is. I can assure you.
Yes, it was sadly the Munich tragedy.
Absolutely.
Which the BBC in those days, sadly, no more. The BBC doesn't exist anymore, in the right sense of the word. But in those days, they used to find their new comedy shows by having a situation, a comedy playhouse series, as you're all aware. And they would, we'd do half a dozen pilots, different pilots of different script writers and all so on. And they would show them all and gauge the reaction of the public and say, well, we think that one might go into series and the others will forget. They were undecided what was going to go to series, and at that time, when the Munich tragedy occurred with the Olympics, and they were desperate to find something quick to throw on television. And I think it was almost a question of somebody saying, well, we'll have that one. And stuck it on, and it got a very good reaction and filled the tragic slot, and that was it. It wasn't a huge success on the first series. It took about 2 series before the public began to accept the premise of the shop and the characters, and which were all a little bit larger than life, let's be frank. And then it took off. But that was a wonderful thing that the BBC used to do in those days. They used to nurse their comedy programmes, or they'd say, well, we'll just give people time to get used to it. And they did 2 series, 3 series. Nowadays, because it's ratings, it's because it's revenue, it's those... They tend to say, oh, it didn't get a big enough viewing, that's it, boom, gone. And you think, hang on.
Let's have a little look at yourself. I think it's ready now, and hopefully it's going to work.
Put it on the podium, Miss Brown.
Come on, dear, you're going on the podium. That's it, on there, that's right. Push it down.
No. Oh, really, you're so clumsy.
Thank you, Miss Brahms.
Just a minute. Isn't there something missing?
Oh, no, I think it looks quite realistic, actually. I see what you mean. It must be in the lift.
Put the Chandor 2-piece on it, Miss Brown.
Yes, Mrs. Slough.
Oh, and hurry up with that head, Mr. Lucas. It's nearly opening time.
Give me a minute. Suits you.
Now, I mean, to me, looking at you there, suddenly you've got this really trendy haircut all of a sudden, and, I mean, you're almost transformed into being the kind of Cockney Y-boy, kind of smooth operator there.
Well, I don't know. Perhaps we thought that was all part and parcel of the thing. But don't forget, at that time, everybody was wearing their hair long, their ties this wide, and their lapels this wide, and their shoes that high. It was a very weird time, wasn't it, when you think about it?
It was a collection of great actors and actresses, I think.
It was,
who
yes.
came together. They weren't known for being comedians or comedians or whatever. They were great actors, and it had that kind of perfect mix almost. What was it like being part of that kind of group?
Well, it was lovely because most of us had known each other before we came to work together. And some of us had known each other for quite a number of years before and worked together. I'd had the pleasure of working with Wendy in a couple of films and things. And Molly I hadn't worked with, but it was nice. We all fitted in, so we all knew each other. So there was no sort of, 2 years of 2 series honeymoon period. We all got on straight away, and that was it. It was fine. And people were always very kind and very generous towards each other in their work. And we all enjoyed what we were doing, and I think that's really what contributed to its success.
Did you ever get a sense of almost the theatricality of the show? Because I mean, certainly you were asked to do music numbers, weren't you, and perform song and dance routines and do all sorts of things at time, almost like the old musical days, really.
Well, it was. I mean, that's why. Are You Being Served was successful, probably for some of those reasons. It wasn't, in my view, situation comedy. In pure situation comedy, it wasn't like, Step Toes or even Dustbin Men. There was no sort of great depth to the characters. It was very pantomimic. It was very superficial, very musical. That was part of its charm, really.
Did you find it took your career in a different direction because you were being asked then very different roles to do?
Well, when you do situation comedy series for a long period of time, it's inevitable that you have that image around your neck, and it's very difficult to shake off. I was very lucky because I used to always, in between series, and the series was only 7 weeks' work a year, so between that, I was always going back to the theatre, touring with all sorts of plays, a lot of comedies, but also some thrillers and dramas and so on as well.
Gotcha.
So that tended, to keep the equilibrium.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I mean, I will carry on in a moment, but let's open to the audience. Any questions from the audience? So if anybody would like to ask Trevor something, perhaps?
Yes.
You just disappeared. I think he's asking the question, why did you leave? Absolutely.
Well, you asked me why I left the series. Well,
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I left the series. A moment ago I said that Are You Being Served was 7 weeks' work a year. Okay, that's all. But, so, I mean, and in those days of the BBC money, you didn't live on 7 weeks' money from the BBC. So, because that was prior to the days when they pay all the sort of money, a lot of money they pay nowadays. What happened was, I used to, as I say, I always used to finish the series whenever we'd made it, and then go off and tour in a play, or go into the West End in a play, or whatever it was. The thing being, with the unpredictability of the BBC at that time, we didn't even know if we were going to do another series the following year. And in fact, for 1 year, I don't think we did any at all. And then they suddenly came back. And so I used to go off and tour in a play.
Do you have a regret leaving, or were you glad you left at that?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what in fact happened was we'd finished the series, and there was no mention of any more the following year. So I was offered a tour of a very nice play, which was just finishing with Richard Briers in the West End. Would I take it on tour? Lovely play, lovely play. And I said, yeah, absolutely fine. So that was all fixed and done. And everything's booked. And suddenly the BBC came back and said, oh, we want to do another series. And I said, well, when are you going to do it? That's fine, but I'm booked. Yeah. Oh, you'll have to give that up, they said. I said, I'm sorry, excuse me. This is 20 weeks' work at rather more money than you paid me for the BBC. What do you mean I've got to give it up? Oh, well, you can't. Anyway, end result was, dear David Croft said, oh, well, we'll have to change the recording now. I said, look, if you can change your recording date to a Sunday, and there are dates relatively near to London so I could rehearse during the day, I could still do it. So we set it all up, and so that was all going to be fine. My theatrical management very kindly managed to organise theatrical dates like Brighton and Croydon and Richmond and places, so I could do the thing. They then came back and said, no, we've had to change, go back to the Friday recording, so you'll have to change. I said, no, I'm not, that's the end of it. So just a question of don't mess about,
And that's it for July. I will see you again in August. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? Bye.